Hello friend, I am Rahat Hassan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Friend, before going to start this particular lecture, I would like to welcome all of you in this online course on international relations in a changing world. Today, friend, we will discuss on another important topic in international relations, that is culture and world politics. So, what we will do in this particular lecture, we will first try to understand what is the meaning of culture, the basic understanding about culture, and why culture becomes so important in the discipline of international relations or world politics. Then we will try to understand also in a very precise manner that why or what are the factors behind the rise of identity politics more precisely after the end of the Cold War. And then the particular debate about the culture and world politics, how that culture is actually impacting the dynamics of international relations or world politics in a contemporary time. In doing so, we will also discuss about the various approaches or the theoretical understanding or the theories of international relations. With the help of that, we will try to explain the importance or the dynamics of culture in international relations, and then, of course, we will discuss the very important things in that particular discussion or debate over culture in world politics, that is the conception of modernization and how it is related to the concept of westernization. And we will also try to explain that the conception of multiculturalism out of the process of or out of the forces of globalization in contemporary time, and how that created a kind of conflict and also cooperations among the various culture which are there in the international system. In doing so, we will also try to explain the concept, the very debatable concept in international relations, put forward by Huntington conception, that is the clash of civilization. And we will also discuss the theories or the concept given by Francis Fukuyama regarding the end of history concept. So the post-colonialism, religious revivalism, and the East and West confrontation, and also in the light of the conception of clash of civilization, and also the homogeneous culture that the West trying to impose with the end of the end of the politics of Cold War. So these are the things that we will try to discuss, and after that we would be in a position to know or to understand the concept of culture in the domain of international relations. So friend, before going to start this particular topic, we trying to understand the conception of culture and why identity and culture matters in international relations. In order to understand that sort of things, we have to know the concept of culture, what is culture and how we can define the concept of culture. So in that sense, the culture is a kind of identity of the people, that the status of the individuals in the society, the status of the individuals in the community, or in a particular way we can say the people's identity which differentiate and distinguish with the others, and uh, also define the self of that particular individual. So the culture is particularly the activities, the belief, attitude, orientation of the people in the society, how that particular person look at, how the person is behaving in the society, that actually define the conception of culture. means that constitute that orientation, belief, attitude, and activities of the individual in a particular way in that particular society, that actually define the conception of culture, or that actually compose the conception of culture. So that culture is not a natural phenomena, it is an inherited phenomena constructed in the society, and the people are engaged in a particular society. That society is actually creating, or that society is actually exhibiting or reflecting a particular culture, and that particular culture is different from the other cultures in the society, or other cultures in the domain of international relations, other cultures in the other nation or other society in the international system. So that particular culture, and that is not natural, as I said, the natural things. It is we inherited certain things that is given by nature itself. But in the case of culture, it's a kind of lifelong process. People's experience, people's attitude, people's belief, people orientation, that it will define a kind of culture in the society. So the culture is different from natural kind of things, and the culture is very much related to identity. Identity is a kind of relatively stable, enduring sense of selfhood. Identity may be personal, that is unique to a particular individuals, and identity also can be a social, that is the share that which are shared with the group, and also identity is human, that is shared with the all people in the society. So that identity and culture are very much related to each other, and identity, that culture define the identity of the individuals in the society. A culture is composed of the customs, norms, genres that inform social life, and in that particular sense, religion remains a key influence in that particular composition of the culture. So, in that sense, what we can understand is that a culture is a kind of culture is a kind of orientation, belief of the people in the society. Cultural groups often define themselves by representing different culture as an alien and as the others. So that defines we and others, that create a distinction between the people on the basis of culture in the society. Culture may be constructed on number of levels. Civilization is the broadest form of cultural identity, and it represents coherent identity and tradition that may spread across nation and state. The West has been the dominant civilization in the modern age, and all other civilizations have had to absorb its influence, whether this was welcome or not. The cultural hegemony of the West challenged the culture and social order of most society. The new wave of globalization has made local resistance in some places from those seeking to preserve their culture from uninhibited change. Religious revivalism has been a global phenomenon since 1970s. The impact of the West has been the principal issues facing Islamic civilization. Islam revivalists have embraced a culture conflict with the West. As the Cold War came to an end, a discourse was led by Samuel Huntington that suggested a clash of civilization was about to become the principal cause of international conflict. The forces of globalization have brought the different culture into closer contact and gives challenge to the traditional pattern of culture and social order. Culture change created frictions. Cultural change created frictions. People are not clashes at the local level, but there is a tension and clashes between global and local forces. The Western culture seems to making a homogeneous global culture, but it is also promoting counter-reaction, which is commonly referred as clash of civilization. This is a common notion that we must defend our culture when it is under threat of disappearance, protect it from globalization, employed it against homogenization, celebrate in its diversity, and find ways of living with the multiplicity of other culture. So these are the arguments that we will discuss in this particular lecture. And the key issue that we will discuss, the key issue that are there in the domain of culture in world politics, that identity politics in international relations try to explore the analytical and normative values of studying international relations from the perspective of identity and culture. What is the relationship between cultures, identity, and international relations? This is the central argument of this particular lecture. Friends, in that regard, we will also try to explain the basic another objective of this particular lecture on culture in the domain of international relations is this will that the central argument, that is the relation between culture, identity, and international relations, that to establish that theme or to construct that theme, this particular discussion will also include the various IR theories, that is liberal perspective to understand, to explain culture, realistic perspective to explain the issue of culture in world politics, and also the critical conception or the critical approaches to understand or to explain that particular issue of culture in the domain of international relations. How can this trend towards so-called identity politics best be explained, and what have been its implications? These questions we will discuss, or we will try to understand with the help of these particular theories of international relations. In addition to that, most importantly, does the increasing importance of culture mean that conflict between different civilizations is more likely or even inevitable? That question is also the central theme or the main theme that we will discuss in this particular lecture. And we will discuss, or we will also try to know or try to explain that to what extent religious revivalism affected global politics. That also another important things or important components of this particular lecture. And finally, the issue of identity, culture, and religion have played a particularly prominent role in attempts to challenge and displace the political cultural hegemony of the West. Friend, we will also try to understand the process through which former colonies have tried to establish non-Western and sometimes anti-Western political identities affecting the politics of non-Western countries, which may commonly define in terms of global South. This trend has been especially crucial in the Muslim world, encouraging some to talk in terms of civilizational clash between Islam and the West. So these are the central themes or the objective of this particular discussions. We will discuss that, and I hope after discussing all these components of this particular lecture, we would be in a position to understand the concept of culture and how culture become important in the contemporary world politics. Now we will discuss from the important things that the international politics that got changed from ideological conflict to identity politics. And in that regard, there are certain forces, certain factors that compelled the international political relation thinkers that to include a particular topic, that is culture, in the domain and discussion of world politics. So, as we know, or we have already discussed the basic things or the introductory part of the international relation, international politics and global politics in some previous classes. So we know well about that the international relations is about the relations among the state, how a state is interacting with the rest of the state in the international system. So in that context, the political aspect, the political dimension of the state's behavior or state relations with the other state in the nation-state system, that was the main concern or that was the main subject issue or the subject matter of international relations up to the end of the Cold War period. So the whole international relations was discussed in terms of politics, in terms of war, in terms of peace, and in terms of conflict among the states, and also the states, cooperation and conflict, the nation-state system structure. These were the important things that was the main subject concern of the international relations after or up to the end of the Cold War period. In that period also, we also see a kind of, during that period, we also see the international relations was largely dominated by the state or state behavior, state war, state conflict. First World War, Second World War is the example of that, and many some other ideological conflict between the two superpower during the Cold War period. That is the ideological conflict between USA and former USSR. So that ideological conflict that defined in terms of Cold War politics, the conception of data, concept of arms race. So that state-oriented cooperation, state-oriented conflict, war, conflict, state-oriented institutions making like United Nations, League of Nations, some other multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations as well. So these were mostly that international relations controlled by these factors and these forces of international relations. But after the end of the Cold War, a new type of debate that occurred or that happened in international relations that we call as the many new forces, which was non-state centric in nature, which was more identity based in nature, which was more culture based in nature. So that sort of things become more important, more debatable in the context of world politics. So that ideological conflict between the two superpower, which define in terms of bipolarity world system, ideology of West and ideology the Western conception of ideology led by USA, that is the open market system, liberal democratic model, and the another point of view or the another antagonistic ideology that was led by former USSR, which was based on closed economy and also the state controlled sort of economy and controlled sort of political system. So these ideological tensions between the two superpower was the main concern or main subject matter of international politics. So because of certain factors like westernization as modernization, politics of collective identity, who we are, and also the various manifestations of identity politics that pave the way or take the central stage, that is the issue of culture, many other similar normative issues in the domain of international relations. So in that sense, we can see that there are various new emerging countries that emerged after 1945, means in the 1950s period, that we call as the new independent country of Africa, Asia and Latin America. So the concept of nationalism in that part of the world, that is Asia, Latin America and Africa, that country, the process of nationalization or the concept of nationalism which emerged in that particular group of in that particular area of the international system or nation state system or global system, that actually become one of the important factor that challenge the Western conception of hegemonic culture or Western sort of culture. So this is one of the important reasons why the culture becomes so important in the domain of international relations. In addition to that, the issue of identity politics based on identity to preserve the identity of the local peoples or the local culture or local affiliations towards their culture, their social practices, their political values, their political orientations, their economic orientations. That also become one of the another factors for the rise of culture, the rise of debate, or the rise of the issue of culture in the domain of international politics or world politics. In addition to that, we also see the concept of global south that emerged in the contemporary time, the concept of non-alignment movement, that is the retaining the identity and the independent voice of the third world countries in the name of non-alignment movement. So that similar sort of things that also paved the way for the rise of issue of culture in the domain of international politics as well. In addition to that, the rise or the revivalism of religion, more importantly in the Asian nations and also more precisely in the case of Middle East, West Asian nations, that the Islamic revivalism and the role of religion in the domain of politics, which also affecting the discourse or the dimension of international relations as well. So because of that reasons, that culture become one of the important things and important things to debate in the domain of international politics. In addition to that, the new conceptions like gender, culture, ethnicity, religion, sexuality. So these are the basic concern, basic things. Because of that reason, the culture become one of the important issue in the domain of international relations. So now, friends, we will discuss that to understand that sort of things. In nutshell, we can say that how culture is becoming important in the domain of international politics. As in the case of international relations, traditionally the international relations or the subject matter of international relations were more giving emphasis on the political dimension, state-centric dimension, security, national security, power politics, war, conflict, cooperations, creation of international organizations and international law. These were the important things, but after the end of the Cold War, because of certain factors, certain forces that emerge in the discourse of international relations, like the independent nations, that and also the nationalists which prevail in that particular independent nations, and also the process of globalization, the new things, new factors emerge in the discussion of international relations, and because of that reason, culture become one of the factors, one of the important factors, or one of the important issue in the discourse of international relations or world politics. Now, friends, we will try to understand that sort of things, that is the cultural kind of things or identity issues in the domain of international politics which emerge, how that theories of international relations understand or explain that particular issue of culture in the domain of international relations. So in that context, we know that realism, liberalism, and the various other important theories of international relations like critical theories, structuralism and constructivism, these are the important theories that try to explain the conception of culture and how that these particular theories or approaches to international relations, these theories explain the issue of culture in the domain of international politics. So in that regard, we will confine our discussion on these three particular approaches to international relations. One is the realistic view of international relations to explain the cultural aspect in international politics. Another important theory that we also call as the dominating theory or the classical theory, along with the realistic approach to international relations, is the liberal approach to understand, or the liberal view to understand or to explain the conception of culture in the domain of international relations. And the contemporary theory, that is critical views or the critical approach to international relations, how that particular approach is actually explaining the concept of culture or the issue of culture and identity in the domain of international politics or world politics. So with the help of all three important approaches to international relations, realistic, liberal and critical view, we will try to explain the issue of culture in the domain of international relations or world politics. So friends, first we will explain or try to understand that the realistic view or the realistic approach to international relations, how that particular approach is actually explaining the issue of culture in world politics. As we know that the realistic approach is basically consider or focusing that the state are the main actors in international relations. So the international relations is dominated by the state, and it is more state-centric kind of approach to explain the dynamics of international relations. So the important point in that regard is state are the main actors, state interest, state's power, and the anarchical situation which prevail in the nation-state system, that are the main argument that are put forwarded by the realistic approach or the realistic view to international relations. So in that regard, we see the realistic approach to international relations hardly give any importance to the normative approach to normative issues in international relations. So that particular conception of identity, the conception of culture, and that sort of normative issues or identity issues given less importance in the discussion of international relations or the explanation of international relations. So, from the perspective of realistic approach to international relations, the issue of culture, identity, that are the less important issue in international relations. More important issues are state interest, that we call as the national interest, and their interactions, their conflicting interactions, which is based on zero-sum game. That are the important things, or that are the important issues that covered from the realistic point of view in the domain of international relations. Unlike that, there are other classical and dominating approaches in international relations that we call as the liberal view or the liberal approach to international relations. So, in that context, friend, as we know that again that liberal approach is given importance to state. They consider that state are the main actors in international relations. But the differences between the liberal and the realistic view to international relations is that, as we know, we have already discussed that the liberal approach and the realistic approach, the common things between these two important classical approach to international relations, they consider state as an important actor, and their relation is the main thing to discuss or to explain international relations. But the differences is that in the realistic approach to international relations, the national interests expressed in terms of national power and that expressed in terms of zero-sum game, which means that the protection of the state's sovereignty, national interest of a particular nation is at the cost of other nation, and there is a absence of any common government or common institution or the super institutions that can control the selfish behavior of the state. So that anarchy is the condition, anarchy is the natural phenomena which happened in the nation-state system, and because of that anarchical situation which prevail in the nation-state system, the state would behave in a selfish and state would behave more in terms of conflicting manner. And for that matter, the state would enhance constantly its national power. But the liberal approach to international relations, again, they consider a state as a main actor in international relations, but they consider that a state will not behave in a conflicting way, rather the state would behave in a cooperative manner, because there are various issues which is common to every state, and that issues are defined in terms of mutual gain and mutual cooperation. So the state in that sense will cooperate with other states, because there is a possibility of cooperation among the state to achieve the common goal. That common goal is the economic exchange and the issue of various common issues like poverty, like eradication of poverty, employment, economic exchange, and also the world peace, international maintenance of international peace and security. So for these to achieve that sort of goals which is common to every nation, the state would behave in a cooperative manner, and for that cooperation, the state would engage in creating international organization and also in formulating international rules, regulation, and law as well. So in that sense, the liberal approach is focusing much on state-centric sort of relations, and in that the state cooperations was given much importance to in the explanation of international relations. But at the same time, the liberal approach also giving some sort of importance to these normative issues like identity, culture, ethnicity, and similar sort of things which are related to the identity and culture of the individuals. But they consider that these sort of normative things which is related to identity and culture of the individuals, that are secondary in nature. The primary is the state interaction in a cooperative manner, and to create the forces to cooperate the states in the cooperative manner in the state system that are more important compared to the various other normative issues which are individualistic in nature and also which are more related to the identity and culture of the individuals. But as we say, the international relations, as we know that the international relations define that the nation is state common and homogeneous in nature. There is no any sort of conflict between the conception of nation and conception of a state. Rather, state explained in terms of homogeneity, that the state characteristics, state culture, state identity more homogeneous in nature and less heterogeneous in nature. So in that regard, one of the important conception and that liberal approach is also considering that the prosperity of the individual and the protection of the rights and liberty, equality and justice of the individual is all equally important in the domain of international relations, in addition to the protection of the interests of the state as well as the mutual cooperation of all states in the nation-state system. So that conception of human rights, where that they consider that natural in nature and that are equally applicable to all in the nation-state system, irrespective of the people who belongs to any particular nation. So in order to protect these sort of rights, which is given importance by the liberal approach to international relations, that also give a kind of discussion of the topics which are related to culture, which are related to identity of the individual, and also which are related to the ethnicity of the protection of the ethnicity of the people. So in that sense, the liberal approach is giving some sort of space to this sort of explanation, which is normative in culture, including culture, normative in nature, including identity and culture in world politics. Another important issues or another important approach in international relations that we have the critical view or the critical approach to international relations. So as we know that the critical approach is more normative in nature and they are more concerned about the normative values, they are not much concerned about the state-centric conception of international relation or international system. So friends, we know that the critical view approach or critical views of international relations it has the various components. So one of the component is the Marxian approach. Another components within the critical approach to international relations is the constructive approach, and in addition to that, there are many other approaches, sub-approaches also within the broader approaches. That is the critical view or critical approach to international relations. So first, Marxian point of view regarding the conception of culture or issue of culture in world politics is that they consider that the Marxian conception, they consider that these sort of things like identity, like religion, like culture, or these sort of normative issues in international relations, they are secondary, they are not core in nature. Rather, the Marxian approach called the term false consciousness. That these issues are less important compared to the hegemony of the capitalist class or the ruling class in the nation-state system. So the Marxian approach and the new Marxian approach as well, they consider that the state are the important actors in the nation-state system, but the important actors in the international system is the capitalist class, or which are dominating in nature, that entrepreneur class, which are there in every state. They actually control the state, they actually create the system, they actually creating the norms of the society or norms of the nation-state system. So it is not about that how the culture is impacting the issue of identity and culture like that. Rather, more important is the relationship or the conflict and cooperative kind of issues which are between that capitalist class, which are there in every state in the global politics. So the issue of identity kind of things, identity issue or like that kind of thing from the Marxian perspective, these are the result of the competitions between the various ruling class, capitalist class in the nation-state system. So it is more a secondary, more false consciousness, and through that the dominating class or the dominating groups try to control the smaller people or the weaker people of the society. In addition to that, new Marxist approach like Gramsci and some other important political thinker or the new Marxist political thinker, they also try to explain that sort of things, that the distribution of the capitalist system, which is the product of the capitalist system, is uneven in nature, and it is the capitalist state that actually control the all domain of the all fruits of the interaction among the state in the nation-state system. So Gramsci is talking about the concept of hegemony, and in that sense, he argued that it is the capitalist class or the dominating and ruling class in the international system. They creating the norms of the society, they creating the values of the society through the various instruments like civil society, state apparatus, religion, and some other instrument or the means. Through that means, the ruling class is actually creating a kind of system or kind of a structure, and the people in thinking in that way means that a particular group of the people belongs to a particular culture or having a distinct identity. They behave in a particular manner because it is the structure which is created by the ruling class or the capitalist class, and out of that influence, the peoples are behaving in that way. So they consider that new Marxism or Marxian approach to international relations vis-a-vis issue of culture in world politics is concerned. They are more talking about that these sort of things is having less importance because the people is behaving in a particular manner, are their preferences, their choices, their activities in the system behaving in a particular way that are actually influenced or that are actually controlled and guided by the structure or by the surroundings or by the environment which is created by the ruling class or the capitalist class. So in that sense, these are the particular way to explain the issue of culture and identity in the domain of international relations. And because of that reason, they argued that the culture and the behavior, orientations, and the belief of the people is vary from one geographical area or one situation to other situation, and one geographical area to other geographical area, because that is the identity and culture is not constant. Rather, the people's identity and their culture or their feelings towards a particular culture is vary from one place to another place, one circumstances to other circumstances, because it is controlled and guided by the ruling class, their values, their norms, international norms and international values, social values. These all are constructed by the hegemonic group or hegemonic class, that is the ruling class and the capitalist class. So these are the basic argument. From that perspective, the Marxian approach or the new Marxian approach that we call the Gramscian approach look at the issue of culture in the domain of international politics. In addition to that, in addition to the constructive approach means how that issue of culture, how the issue of identity can be explained in the domain of international relations. In addition to that critical theory, or more importantly after 1970s onwards, because of certain factors that we already discussed in the introductory remark of this class, that the various factors like that the confrontation between the two cultures, that is the Western culture and the local culture, that the protection of their own particular culture that we call as the identity politics. So that identity politics is also become one of the way to explain the issue of culture in the domain of international relations. So that is that identity and culture, the local culture and local identity. It is also about liberation, and it is also about liberation and also empowerment of the people belongs to a particular culture. So they argued that these theories, the critical theories, are having also the argument that a particular culture is trying to, or the group of the people belongs to a particular culture, is trying to liberate from the hegemony of the West hegemony or the common hegemony that we call as the cultural hegemony. They are trying to liberate from that, and also they are trying to empower from that as well. So that empowerment of the group of the people belongs to a particular culture or having a distinct sort of identity. We also find that sort of expression or explanation in the domain of international relations in the contemporary times as well. For example, we can say that the women empowerment and also the LGBT, the issue of LGBT, and some similar sort of identity politics, or people's having a distinct sort of identity, they want to liberate from the traditional conception of social norms and social values or social culture, and they also trying to empower themselves with the process of liberation from the traditional sort of orthodoxy or traditional sort of social values which prevail in the international system or which prevail in the international society. So these are the basic perspective, these are the basic conception or the explanation with the help of various theories in international relations, and more particularly we discuss the three important tradition or three important approaches in international relations, that is a liberal realistic view to understand the issue of culture, how that the culture is having or have discussed by the realistic school of thought. And we also discuss the liberal point of view to explain the conception of culture, in more particularly the concept of the human concept of universal human rights. In that regard, we see a kind of United Nations creations and also United Nations as international organization, how that international organization given importance to the protection of the rights of the individual, like UDHR and some other sort of organizations within agencies within United Nations, and also the various international law, how that international law is actually protecting the rights of the peoples as well. It means the rights of the smaller groups, or rights of the identity and culture of the various groups or the people in the international system. And we also finally discuss the conception of culture or the issue of culture in world politics from the perspective of critical approach to international relations. In that we try to explain the Marxian conception, new Marxian conception, and the constructive or social constructive explanation to understand the concept of culture or the issue of culture and identity in international politics. So friends, we have discussed in this particular lecture about the basic understanding, the basic meanings of culture, how that culture become more important, or the issue of culture become important in the domain of international relations, and how it replace the traditional explanation of international relations or traditional subject matter of international relations, that is the ideological conflict, power-oriented explanation of international relations, state-centric explanation of international relations, and how these sort of issues, which is normative, culture-based and identity-based, become a more prominent issue in the debate and discussion of international relations. In that regard, we also explain the issue of culture in the domain of international politics with the help of certain approaches in international relations, that is the realistic approach, liberal approach, and critical approach in international relations. With that, we discuss that sort of things in international relations. Friends, in that regard, in summary, we also can explain the why and how that issue of international relations become more important or become important in the discourse or in the discussion and debate of international relations, why that culture, identity, issue of culture, identity become important. In addition to these explanations, that why the culture issue become important in the discourse of international relations, we also have a kind of academic writings that also explain the importance of culture or the importance of the issue of culture in the domain or in the debate and discussion of international relations. So in that regard, there are various academicians or the international relation theories or the practitioners of international relations. They have written about the issue of culture and identity in international politics, but for our discussion, we can take the example of the writings of Francis Fukuyama on the issue of end of the history. In that, he explained that how that the conception of end of history explained the conception of culture or the rise of the culture or issue of the culture in the domain of international relations. And also, we can take the help, or we can also refer the writings of Samuel Huntington regarding the thesis of clash of civilization, and we also have the writing of Benjamin over the conception of Islamic revival or the concept of jihad in Islam. How that sort of issues, and these writings or these theses or this conception put forward by three important political thinker or the practitioners of international relations, how they explain that the issue of culture or issue of identity become important in the discourse of international relations. From that perspective, friend, we can take the example of Foucault, that the conception of end of history. He argued that the whole Cold War politics was between the ideological conflict between USA and USSR, and that conflict was between the capitalist system or the capitalist society or capitalist system, and on the other hand, there is a kind of system that we call as the socialist system or communist system led by former USSR. So after the end of the Cold War and the end of the disintegration of the USSR and also end of the ideology of communism which prevailed in many parts of the world up to the Cold War period. So one of the remaining ideology that was dominated in the world politics or international system is the capitalist system or capitalist model of governance or liberal democratic capitalist system of economy and politics. So in that regard, Fukuyama argued that there is a defeat of communism and win of the capitalism. So there is a end of history, and the whole world will survive or whole will be governed on the basis of the capitalist liberal democratic model. So these characteristics would be adopted, or these models of politics and economy would be adopted by the various states in the nation-state system. So this is one of the way to explain how that conception of one particular conception of culture, one particular conception of identity would prevail in the nation-state system. In this regard, Sam Huntington also explained the conception of cultural differences, and that the word he used, that the clash of civilization or the thesis of clash of civilization, that we will discuss later on in this particular lecture or in the coming lecture. The point of view where we need to explain here is that the clash of civilization means the culture, the larger domain of culture or larger explanation of the culture is civilization that we have already talked about. So he argued that the international system in the coming year or the world politics in the coming years would be not on the basis of the war conflict between the states, rather it will be fought, or the world politics would be decided by the clash of civilizations or the clash of civilizations which are there in the nation-state system in a different way. So that is also one of the writing that also debated much in the international relations, and it also paved the way for the rise of the issue of culture in the domain of international relations. In addition to that, the concept of Islamic revivalism, the concept of Islamic extremism, or the West and Islamic confrontations and the violence which is there, which Benjamin argued that the concept of holy war like jihad, like that kind of thing. So that East-West confrontations, these are confrontations which is explained by these three important political thinkers, that actually paved the way for the rise of the culture in the domain of international politics or world politics. So friends, in this particular lecture we discuss about the concept of culture and the various theoretical explanation and academic writing. Because of that, we see or the various factors like post-colonialism, the conception of globalization, how that issue of culture emerged as an important debate or important issue in the discourse of international relations. So we discuss these things in this particular lecture, and in the coming lecture we will discuss the another debatable issues which are related to the concept of culture in the domain of international relations. With that, I stop here, and thank you very much for joining this particular lecture, and in the coming lecture would be the continuation of this particular topic, that is culture and politics. Thank you very much.